Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast. I'm your host, Jez, and I'm thrilled you're joining us today for another fun-filled episode where we sprinkle a little magic on the world of business and leadership. Each week, we dive into fascinating topics that inspire and educate, all while keeping things lighthearted and enjoyable. Magical Learning has been running successfully as a training and facilitation company for over 20 years and has partnered with global thought leaders like Robin Sharma and John Mattone. So whether you're a seasoned leader, a budding entrepreneur, or just curious about how to make learning magical, there's something here for you. So grab your favorite drink, grab a snack, and sit back, because it's time for some magical learning. And first cap off the rank, our CEO, Graham, you're the first one on the call today. How are you going? Where are you today? And how's your week been?
I'm not sure in what order to address those questions. Oh, well, Jez, thank you. It's been a big week. Jeanette and I were in Cobram and Numurkah. We had a breakfast event in Numurkah, which for those of you watching it or listening from other parts of the world, if you're thinking, what language is that you are speaking? Well, obviously it's Australian, so you should be able to understand it. Numurkah is down near the Murray River, sort of in borderish between New South Wales and Victoria. And most of you don't really care about that, but you probably should. So next time you come to Australia, go to the Shamrock Hotel in Numurkah and tell them that Graham said hi. They'll probably evict you on the spot, but that's not my fault. So I'm up in Canberra at the moment, catching up with family, and I'm good. Is that it? That we run out of time?
That's it, yeah. So anyway, it's been a pleasure being here on the Magical Learning Podcast. Thank you for that, Graham, and as always, good to see you. We'll have to do an episode live from Numurkah at one point. Let's go to John. John, how are you going this week?
Morning all. Yeah, no, I'm had a good week. Had last weekend up in Brisbane with daughter and grandson, so that was good fun. Spending time up there with them. And this weekend I'm heading to Wollongong and then down to Kiama to watch some rugby. So sitting on the coast and drinking beers. I'm not seeing any problems whatsoever.
And which teams are we going for here, John, on this road trip?
I got no idea who's playing, so it's just a round robin competition. So it's more go down and enjoy the spectacle. All
right, well, fantastic. You're going to have to report live back for us next episode and tell us how it all went.
Not a problem, can do.
Great.
I can remember.
And Danette, our Director of Learning and our Adaptability Specialist, how are you going this week?
Yeah, great, yes. I came back in from Johannesburg last Saturday and came straight back into Australian time zone, which was pretty impressive. So had a great time over in South Africa. And then, as Graham said, we went down to the Moira Shire to host a breakfast, which was awesome. And I've been at home the rest of the week, which is nice because I've been away for 2 weeks. And it rained while I was away, so it's beautiful and green.
It looks like you got sun and you had sunglasses on, Danette. You're very white around the eyes.
Awesome. Well, great to have you on, Danette. And Kate O'Neill, our guest for today. How's your week been?
Well, in contrast to Danette, it's cold here in New York, so I've sort of been a shut-in all week, but it's not bad. It's been a good, productive week. A lot of media interviews and podcasts, and the highlight, of course, is being here with all of you and having this conversation.
Perfectly answered, Kate. Just how we scripted it up beforehand. No, Kate, we're so excited to have you on. And of course, people will be able to tell you've got a bit of an accent, so you're going to have to tell us where you're from. But for people that are being introduced to you for the first time, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm an Australian. No, I am a Chicagoan, which is not Australian. And I live in New York City. I am a technologist, tech humanist to be more specific. And my work focuses on, I write and I advise large companies like Google, IBM, United Nations, and so on, about making more human-centric tech decisions. And I have a book that just came out a few weeks ago, which I think we'll be talking a bit about. That's this book, What Matters Next. And I'm sure we'll unpack a little bit about that, but it's all about making human-friendly tech decisions in a world that's moving too fast, which I think many people can probably relate to very much.
Yes, very much so. And it's an absolute pleasure to have you talking about this, because I think it's something that we talk about pretty much. It comes up, I think, once a conversation talking about technology on this podcast, just how much it plays a role in our modern lives. So I'm very excited to dive into the conversation. Before we get into the actual questions, and we are really excited to talk about the book as well towards the end of this as well. Hopefully people get a bit of an insight from the conversation here. But before we get into the actual questions, I was going to say, did you want to tell us about the topic that we've chosen today, which is building adaptable and resilient leadership in a rapidly changing tech landscape?
Yeah, I think, this is the kind of the underlying theme of this book and what has kind of evolved to be the focus of my work, because my work came out of a more sort of pure technology focus, working in solving tech challenges in a more practitioner and manager level type of focus, and then doing consulting around that. But as I became a writer and speaker around those topics over the years, as I spoke to more and more audiences of leaders, C-suite leaders and executive leaders, what I found, especially in these last few years, is that the conversation shifts to leaders feeling hamstrung by the complexity of decisions that they face. And that especially in these times where AI is exacerbating the consequences of decisions, and where, there's so many other factors like climate crisis and geopolitical upheaval and all these kinds of things that are making decisions very difficult. I think it sets this context where learning becomes critical. Like decision makers of every kind need to be informed and need to have models and methodologies for learning that really set them up for the most success in making those decisions, and so that they can approach those decisions with less anxiety, and also so that they can make them better.
Wow. Well, I think that sounds like there's a lot to unpack there. So I think we've got to dive right into the questions. And let's start with Danette. Danette, you always have some good questions. So do you want to tell us about why you chose your questions and what they are?
Yeah, so first, congrats, Kate. It's awesome on your book. So well done.
Thank you.
I always have two questions. So my first one is, what are the top challenges that rapid change in tech is creating for leaders? So you alluded to a couple of them, but I'd love to sort of deep dive in what are the top ones that you see.
Yeah, I think the sense of acceleration, the sense of fast-paced change is what feels to leaders as if it's the top challenge. But it's actually misleading, because the challenge is really the complexity, and it's really trying to make sense of, which obviously brings us right back around to learning, right? And making sense of what's going on in those frameworks and the systems that they're operating within. But it's also the decision paralysis that many of them face. I hear this question a lot. I deliver a keynote, and then, I will get Q&A, we'll take live questions from the stage oftentimes. People will ask sort of set questions, but the one that I often get from executives, from leaders who come up to me individually, one-on-one afterward, they'll say, the thing I'm most concerned about is, what if we invest in a platform and then 3-6 months from now, it's irrelevant because everybody's moving on to some other technology or some other platform. And I think this is a really telling kind of question, because number one, my answer is pretty consistently, you're still going to be so much better off if you've begun to make that change, because so much of transformation is cultural. It's about getting your people to communicate and understand what the imperative is, why you're making these changes, what needs to happen, what are kind of the downstream effects going to be. But then in addition to that, inertia is going to be your worst enemy. And if you're already in the process of making this change, you've already overcome inertia. So that is, I think, the set of characteristics that really makes that environment complicated for leaders. So it is the rapid change, but it's not the rapid change. It's everything that's happening around that rapid change.
And I love that sense of they need that momentum. Even if it's not quite right, the inertia is the thing that really stops them from being able to achieve stuff. So my next question is, how do leaders build their adaptability and resilience, particularly in this rapidly changing environment?
What I believe is that adaptability is not about moving faster necessarily. It's about seeing more clearly. And that means that you need to build processes for yourself that are trustworthy, that you can feel like you're synthesizing information correctly or, appropriately, and that you are making good sense of it. So, you'll hear me say a lot, and I know you have already heard me say in the past, Danette and Graham, that one of the most human characteristics is meaning. Meaning making and meaning seeking are such fundamental parts of being human. And what that really points to is the ability to sense make and kind of put together what we're sensing in the environment around us, what kind of information we're gathering, and how can we synthesize that into something that starts to become insights and then ultimately foresights. So what really, the frameworks that I explore in What Matters Next are really about approaching the future with less of a sense of anxiety and even less of a sense of uncertainty and more of a sense that we have a lot of information, and what we need to do is synthesize the insights from it. And as we're synthesizing those insights, really start to look at what foresights we can put aside. I call them bankable foresights because oftentimes you can bank those and say, I don't need to do this yet. I don't need to act on this yet. But what it is a pointer toward a future likelihood, right? Something that's probably going to matter in the future. And so I should be able to make my current decisions and take my current actions knowing that I can calibrate it with what I believe is going to matter in the future. And that starts to propel me forward. I can start to make those decisions in alignment with what I believe is going to be important going forward. So that, again, it's not that moving faster, it's about the seeing more clearly.
What a great answer. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you. And what a great set of questions. Thank you, Danette.
We love that. Well, let's keep these questions going because I'm already taking so many notes. Let's just keep it rolling. Graham, you've got a question here. Do you want to tell us about that one and why you chose it?
Kate, I probably should apologise ahead of time. I was just looking at Danette's got 2 questions and they take up a single line. I allegedly have one and it takes up a page. So I was thinking about people in that leadership space. Leadership's such an overused word, but if we think of people who are in an environment where they are responsible for working with other people and sometimes leading, managing, directing them, etc., and they're trying to wrap their head around everything that's going on with tech, and I'm not sure anybody can understand all of it. I don't know it's necessarily helpful, but I guess it's how, and your point a minute ago, sorry, there's a truck just going past outside. I'm hoping you're picking that up, folks. Just to highlight how busy things are in this part of the world. It's almost exactly the same as New York City, only different. Distraction, yes. Shiny objectitis. The comment you made before about it's not about going faster, but seeing more clearly. And often, in order for us to have better insights, we need to stop or at least slow down. So it's that weird, it's almost counterintuitive for somebody trying to understand tech, trying to understand all the information that's coming in, feeling as though they need to go fast, they need to consume more, they need to understand more, they need to read more, they need to watch more YouTube videos, whatever it happens to be. But the reality is what they actually need to do is stop or at least slow down in order to be able to gain the insights that are going to help them make better decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think what you're pointing out, the tension, I'm sorry, I don't mean to step on your question. If you still have a paragraph to read there.
We can come back to that one later.
Okay.
That's part of my book.
Yeah, well, fair enough. I look forward to reading it.
Will never be asked because they're too obtuse.
No, I think what you're surfacing here, there are multiple things happening at the same time, I think, in what you're alluding to. One is that I think there is a perceived tension that leaders feel between technological innovation and human needs. Like it seems like they're at odds. In fact, that's all the last couple of weeks. Those are all the media interviews I've been having have been about this because of what we're experiencing in the United States with the whiplash that's happening with the new presidential administration and the co-president of sorts with Elon Musk and the stripping away of regulations. And, wherever, you as a listener fall on the political spectrum, it is clearly a very challenging time to be a leader and to try to understand this kind of regulatory whiplash. Like, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for my organization? How should I lead in this moment? So I've been trying to speak to that on interviews. I'll be doing one tomorrow with a radio interview. And I think it's a very, very complex topic, but yet I think why that feels like it's as complex as it feels is because that dichotomy isn't actually real. Like, I think it isn't the case that there's that much tension between innovation and human needs. That innovation should solve real problems. And so when we lose sight of the human experience that underlies what we're trying to do, then we creating meaningless abstractions. Like that has nothing to do with, we shouldn't be innovating something that's not going to have any utility whatsoever. I mean, there is a place for that. That's called science. And science does a lot of figuring things out just to figure things out. Technology is supposed to be applied. It's supposed to be about figuring out how we can apply what we've learned for the purpose of something. And I think there's no better purpose, there's no more useful purpose, and there's no more business-centric purpose than figuring it out for the sake of human consumption or, usage or whatever you might say. So, I think that the highest order of this is figuring out for human flourishing, for human potential to help humans do better in some capacity. So I think instead of asking, what can this technology do, what I see successful leaders ask is, what could this technology do for humans? And that just that simple pivot, that simple recontextualization, I think helps reorient the discussion to a more human-centric one. And then I think to your point, the other point that I think that was wrapped up in your wonderful thinking there is that you do have this kind of counterintuitive need to slow down to speed up, right? You do need to, I see leaders that are very effective building in strategic pauses and opportunities for reflection in their innovation process cycles. So, this isn't about slowing the progress down. This is about making sure that we're being deliberate and ensuring that what we're building actually has some resonance and will actually, to use a term that's in the title of a book I care about, that it will matter. Making sure that what you're building matters. And I think that's what, I don't think anybody wants to build something that doesn't matter. So there's a natural inclination there to make that work. And I'm really hopeful that regardless of what sort of ideology or political persuasion people come to listening to this kind of discussion with, that they can take away that, yes, okay, we're all in what we're doing because we'd like to do something that matters in some way, at some level. And that, I hope, is a common thread.
Love it. So, Kate, thank you. You have, not surprisingly, managed to improve my question simply by providing an answer. Well done.
It's synergy, Graham.
Yes, let's go with that. That underlying theme of slowing down to go faster.
Yeah.
So more
and actually, I think there's a heading in my book. I think one of the subheadings is slow down to speed up. So, you're right on it.
Yep. Haven't read your book yet because the suppliers to Australia have slowed down to the point where they're actually withdrawing copies from Australia before they've delivered them. So it's coming.
Oh my gosh.
It's on the way.
I'm so glad. I cannot wait for you to have it in your hot little hands there.
A quick shout out to Mr. Bezos. I'm sure you're watching and or listening. Why would you not be? See what you can do, please, Jeff. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thanks for that, Graham. Great question. And thank you, Kate, for that answer. I think this kind of leads a little bit into my question because you're talking a little bit about, it can feel quite like there's a lot going on. And my question, I guess, is about, it's not necessarily about keeping up with AI, but it is a little bit. It's about taking in everything that's going on all at the same time because it feels like there's a lot sort of coming down the pipeline. So AI and tech make up just one part of the world that feels like it's moving very quickly. Other parts feel like climate change, global politics, and even some amorphous concepts for people like the truth feel like they're changing. I was wondering how you managed to stay not just across technology, which has its own rapidly changing landscape, but also across other domains that are rapidly evolving. Because I think you could spend all your time on tech and you would still be probably doing that full time. I mean, this is on top of also me as an NBA fan having huge NBA trades happen, and I'm trying to keep an understanding of what's going on with tech. So how do you sort of keep your head around everything? Because it feels like everything's changing so rapidly.
Yeah, I think my equivalent is in pop culture. I really want to know what's happening with, the latest with Taylor Swift and Beyonce and Kendrick Lamar. And, I have to know all that stuff. So it has to stay on my radar in addition to, what What are topological qubits that Microsoft has just claimed to discover? What does that mean? What have we now learned about quantum computing? It's like, all right, so I'll have to learn about topological qubits in addition to Kendrick Lamar, and that's just going to have to go side by side in there somewhere. Let me ask you, is your question, are you asking more about how global organizations and leaders of organizations do this, like kind of keep all these kind of things moving at once, or are you asking me how I keep these things going?
I was actually asking you, yeah.
Okay.
Because I think you've got the reason I'm asking is because I think you've got a good handle on the tech side of things, and it's something that I think I would like to be better at keeping a handle on. And so you've got a sort of specialization in this. So I just want to know your kind of technique of balancing that with Taylor Swift and, the Super Bowl and all the subtle things that Kendrick hit in there,
Yeah, there were so many. It was, it was right up my alley because I love being able to unpack meta messages. So that was really rich with that. Even if you think, I'll talk about my own learning processes, but I think this is probably true for leaders of global organizations. And so people who are aspiring to do higher level leading, this is probably going to be pretty common to that answer. So I think one of the things is, I'll just say for myself on this one, I think imposter syndrome gets way more attention than it deserves. Like, I think this is an overblown problem. I think that we all can begin with a learner's mindset and grow into competence and even expertise through learning and through disciplined practice. So I have, in my own career, I have examples of this. Like I have a educational background in languages. So absolutely not what you would expect someone in my career to have studied. My undergrad work is in German, Russian and linguistics, and international studies. So, super relevant. And then my grad work is in linguistics and language development. So how adults learn second languages. Not at all, I think, what people would assume. So a couple things about that. One is, I believe that the humanities are a fantastic basis for understanding technology, especially as a tech humanist, right? Like, especially as someone who's trying to understand the impacts of technology on human experience and on humanity at large. The other thing is that I think what that gave me was a really good basis in understanding, well, I've already mentioned meaning, right? Meaning as this central construct. And I think I think about semantics, obviously, as a linguist, as this one layer of meaning in exchange, like how we communicate with one another, what we're trying to communicate. But there are also ways in which technology is a reconstruction of that, like semantics or syntax at the web level or at the information architecture level, or like user experience or whatever. Those are all maybe you could think of as metaphorical, at least, layers like semantics or syntax. And then on top of that, now here we are in 2025, 2.5 years into the ChatGPT moment, where large language models have completely reconstructed the way we learn and do business, and what we think going forward is going to be the model of technology. So it's a really interesting sort of full circle moment. In addition to that, so after coming out of that educational background, I got recruited by Toshiba to come out to Silicon Valley to build an intranet for them. They actually recruited me to come document their software, their hardware. In fact, it was chips. I was documenting chips that were going into the Sony PlayStation 2. I knew nothing about documenting chips, but I had built a website. This is such a weird story. I built a website at the University of Illinois at Chicago when I was heading up the language laboratory, and it was one of the first websites to have been built at the university. And it was early enough in the web, 1994, that someone put it on a manually curated list of new websites that actually used to happen. There were few enough websites that somebody would go like, oh, here's a new website, put it on a list. And so someone in California at Toshiba saw it, and we got talking, and they recruited me to come out and document their chip for them. And in the process, my job expanded to build an intranet. So that intranet actually sat on a server that sat on my desk, and I installed all of the protocols, all of the server systems and everything that ran that intranet. It turned out to have been the first intranet at Toshiba across the entire company. And, it was one of the first intranets really, I think, in Silicon Valley. It was just Did I get hired because I knew how to build intranets? No, of course not. But this is my point about the imposter syndrome thing. My long circuitous point coming back to, I think imposter syndrome is so overplayed, because if I had pleaded out like, oh gosh, I don't think I'm the right gal for this job because I don't know how to do what you're asking me to do, I would have missed out on the opportunity to teach myself on the job, figure it out, because nobody else knew how to do this either. So it's not like I was lacking some fundamental knowledge that 20 other candidates would have brought with them. At any rate, so I think that's a really critical point, and I've made it with a lot of time here. So I'll move on to another point. I think is that I think we don't often develop our own learning frameworks well enough. Like, I think there is an opportunity for all of us to improve the way we gather information and review that information, process it, synthesize it, really squeeze all of the value and all the nuggets out of what we're reading and learning and everything that exists. And so I have, for example, a system that allows me to process a really extensive amount of reading material. I read a lot of books, usually over 100 a year, and a lot of articles and email newsletters and social media. And I'm constantly pulling those into my systems, Evernote, Notion, my different systems, and then organizing it into a taxonomy of key concepts that then fuels my research and my writing, and then allows me to continually just gather and see, what's interesting about this, and especially now with all of the AI augmentation that you can do with, like in Notion, I've just been pulling down these Microsoft quantum computing stories and then asking Notion to provide an AI summary at the top of each article. But not just any AI summary. I'm asking Notion to provide an AI summary that is specific to what it knows about what I'm interested in. So it knows my taxonomy. It knows the things that I tend to write about and my bent toward, this humanist angle of technology. And so it's highlighting all these points that are like, eventually, this architecture could allow us to solve problems at scale more readily. It's going to allow us to discover drugs more readily. And so it's highlighting those points of the article and of the journal article in ways that would have taken me a lot longer to get to. So this is all very, very long-winded, and I hope it's getting at kind of the gist of what your question is meant to scratch the surface of. But I could really, as you really asked a question that I could probably spend another hour talking about, so I'm just going to wrap it up right there and say, like, I think it's that learning process. It's not cutting yourself short, and not selling yourself short on whether, if you feel like you don't know something, it's an opportunity to learn it. And then, one last thing is, I think what you all are doing with this podcast is a great example of the learning that I think we all have such an opportunity to do, because building relationships with genuine experts in a thing who challenge your thinking and bring you additional knowledge about that thing is truly one of the best ways you could learn. And so I have a podcast, and your podcast as well creates opportunities to learn from people who have deep knowledge in the specific areas you want to explore. So I know one of the questions that's on the list is about kids and tech. I don't know that much about kids and tech. I'm not a parent, and it's not I think this is a really specialized area. So I admit that's not my area of expertise, but I am bringing on experts onto my show because I get this question a lot, because parents want to know, and because anybody who's a teacher wants to know. People want to know what the way to think about interventions for kids with technology, what the best approach there is. And I want to be prepared for that. So, I found out I was on a UN AI advisory body call this past week, and I noticed a woman who was speaking about AI ethics and kids, and I was like, got it, nailed it. Gonna ask her onto the show. And so I connected with her on LinkedIn, invited her, and she's in. So I think that's just what an enormous opportunity that is compared to, the pre-podcast era. Like, I could have invited her to, I could have said, I'm really interested in learning more about this. Can we have a virtual meeting sometime and talk about it? And she might have said yes. People are sometimes generous with their time that way. But now I get to offer her a self-serving opportunity to say, like, come on to my show and get some self-promotion. And I get to learn in the process from her. And so does my audience. So I think that's an incredible opportunity.
Yes. And that's exactly what we're getting here. So I feel grateful that we're getting the opportunity. And thanks for all that. There's so many things I wanted to unpack out of that, but we will go to John's question shortly. I was just going to say, we should definitely have you on, Kate, for one of our Concept Sandbox episodes, which is where we basically talk about a business problem in a fantastical setting, but then we like to all sort of share a story. But I think that you'll have a good lens as to how to bring sort of how to utilize tech, like how you were talking about, to sort of synthesize information and everything. I mean, yeah, I'm going to have to go back through this recording and take some notes and what have you to really understand everything. But yes, thank you for that. Let's go to John's question here. So John, what was your question? Tell us a bit about why you chose it. Okay, I think his question's about imposter syndrome in leaders and how to get people to sort of follow you there. Kate?
I think that what I'm hearing about the question, and John, please tell me if this is what you're asking, is that, as a leader, as you're trying to keep up with these technology changes and make decisions, you have to lead, you have to, take the team in a direction, and you may be feeling like you have to lead in a direction that you're not entirely sure is the right one, and sort of learning in the moment as you're making decisions. Is that a correct interpretation of what you were saying, or am I making it up? I'm doing that thing where a leader has to just go in the direction, right? So let me address that in case that is kind of the gist of the question. I think that, this kind of speaks to the point I was making to Danette in reference to Danette's question earlier about that question I get from leaders often, which is, what if it's the wrong platform? What if I'm making the wrong investment? And I actually think, John, it sort of goes back to your original question about technical debt and that sort of framework as well. So these kind of do seem like they go together. There's a way in which I just had this conversation the other day with a Danish podcaster. Great conversation, because I'm going to be speaking in Copenhagen at the end of April, so I'm learning Danish. So I got to play along and test out my Danish. But also he is an AI expert, and so we were talking about corporate enterprises adopting AI in various ways and structured versus unstructured data underlying all of that, data hygiene practices. There's a lot of variables that determine how effective an AI implementation in an enterprise is going to be. There's a lot of variables that determine, how that AI digital transformation is going to look and how extensive it can be, what it can do for an organization. And I think what he was talking about technical debt, and I mentioned this idea that I think that we often think that technical debt is something that we got wrong, just like consumer debt, right? Think about like consumer debt. Like it's as if we did something wrong and now we're carrying this debt. And we have to sort of like seek forgiveness for our sins. And I actually think it's the wrong way to look at it. I think in most cases, when we incur debt of any kind, we incur it because we believe that the future has the potential to be better than the present. And that means that all that we then have to do is make sure that we have the opportunity to clean up after ourselves, that we are appropriately making regulated and correct, sort of timed decisions, that we can then come back in and make sure we're repaying our consumer debt. We're cleaning up the technical debt we incur along the way. I think this is true about those large leadership decisions too. I think if you lead in a direction that you say, we're going to, let's say, automate some portion of our customer support function. We're going to use robotic process automation. We're going to use ChatGPT or, some kind of conversational AI. And we're going to replace some amount of the calls coming in with handling through those systems. We're not necessarily downsizing the headcount yet. We're going to sort of play that out, game it out, see if we can reskill or upskill, and we'll just see how that goes. That's a decision that's not very difficult to start, because you can easily see how you can gain efficiencies and have some cost savings and so on. I think where it starts to become challenging is as you start to invest in a platform. I just spoke earlier last year for a platform called ServiceNow. They do a lot of this kind of thing, but they do these kinds of platforms, and you could put a lot of money into adopting this one platform and then be like, well, that got us where we wanted to be 10%. of the way. Like, but we don't know that we want to keep investing in that platform. We maybe want to move to this other one. And I think, again, that goes back to, is your future still better than your present? Like, are you still looking ahead and going, there are decisions that we can foresee are still relevant? Like, we still are trying to move to a place where we think that a certain chunk of the capacity of calls coming in can be handled through intelligent automation. And if so, let's still move in that direction. We may have to pivot on what platform we're using. We may have to, retrain some of the human support engineers or whatever. But the point is, I think where we incur that debt is where we need to continue making sure we're moving in the direction of repaying. That, I think, is the hopeful part of that answer. And then I think it's also the opportunity where we look at that insights and foresights, like the bankable foresights opportunity, as a trajectory, as a sort of triangulation. And I'll share one story. I know that you'll probably have a bio of mine in the show notes or something, but one of the sort of highlights of my career is that I got to be one of the first 100 employees at Netflix, and that was a really fun, informative experience way back in the day. But what was really, really cool about that was getting to see, at a time, this is in 99, 2000, 2001, at a time when Netflix was a very tiny startup in Los Gatos, California. Blockbuster was, of course, the number one brand for, DVD rentals. Everybody would go to the store to rent a DVD. At this time, there was no guarantee that Netflix, which was doing DVD rental by mail, of course, would ever emerge as the victor in that battle. But even at that time, the leadership, Reed Hastings and the other leaders, decided that there were enough indicators like internet speeds increasing and consumers seeking more types of solutions online and things like that, that they started to invest research and development dollars and resources into what would be the next platform. What would be, and it was like set-top boxes were the predecessor to streaming as we now know it. And so they were putting research and development into what were then called set-top boxes. And this is 2000 or so. Roku, the first standalone set-top box, didn't come along until 2006. And Netflix didn't have a dedicated streaming plan until 2007. So this is like 6-7 years ahead of the availability of these major platforms. And while still the tiny, tiny upstart against the 800-pound gorilla in the space. And I just think that's an incredible bit of vision that it takes to be able to guide a company and make those sort of far-reaching decisions while managing the day-to-day, while managing, that very much managing very closely what your day-to-day priorities are. And so that's a very now and next kind of management that I think it's hard, but I think it's what ultimately comes down to those kinds of opportunities. So I hope, John, that in some way speaks to the question that we were having a difficult time hearing there, but hopefully that offered some value for listeners one way or the other.
I think it was a great story. And great insights as well there, Kate. So thanks for that. Look, we're getting right to the end of our podcast here, so let's grab some final insights from everybody quickly. And I might start with you, Danette. Did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation and just today's conversation?
I loved all of the stories. I really liked that Netflix one where they're investing ahead of time and organisations thinking about knowing what, or identifying what's possibly next. I really liked your definition of adaptability, which is around seeing clearly. So it's not around going faster, but seeing clearly. And I really love the insights, foresights, and bankable foresight. So great conversation, Kate. I'm pretty sure we're going to get you back soon too. There's so much to unpack. So thank you.
Thank you, Danette.
Yes, I agree with Danette. We have more questions even in this conversation left, so we'll definitely have to have you back for round two. Graham, did you have any insights about today's conversation at all?
Yeah, a lot. As Danette and Jess both said, Kate, it's been great having you on. You definitely will need to come back. If only just to give you more time to be able to actually read my original question in full, and then ignore it. I love the idea of building in strategic pauses. Again, this concept of slowing down to go faster and adaptability through clarity, which doesn't come by going faster, but sort of slowing down. Towards the back end, when you were talking about Netflix and just that vision for where they thought they could go, paraphrasing quite poorly. One thing that sort of jumped out at me was the importance of still having a vision for your organisation that is predominantly human-centric. And as long as that big picture, that North Star is still sort of human-centric, then that can help influence decisions along the way. We need a year. When are you coming to Australia?
When are you ringing me there?
I'll get our people to talk to your people. We'll pick you up at the airport. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Graham. And thank you, Kate. Kate, did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation? And did you also want to share us a little bit about your book, What Matters Next?
Yeah, people can find it at whatmattersnextbook.com. It's been a really interesting process since it came out, coming out at a time, as we were talking about with all of this regulatory whiplash in the United States, as well as at the same time that the global sort of AI community, like a governance community, is trying to figure out, more progressive regulations and what makes the most sense for regulating around AI. It's been a very interesting time to have this book hit the market and to have the provocations of the conversation. So, and also when DeepSeek came out of China at this time, and so I've been having a lot of media interviews about that. One of the very first things that Trump did when he got into office was overturn Biden's AI executive order. So we've been having a lot of conversations about that. It's really been a kind of a wild time to be having these conversations, but I think that means that it's the right time. So I hope that that's going to mean that people have in this book a resource that helps them better frame up the complicated environment that they're leading in.
And I think there's no better time to, if you don't know much about AI, to get your head a bit around it. And this book sounds like a great place to kind of start there. Now, Kate, if people have listened to this and they've gone, you know what, I need to reach out to Kate, where's the best place for them to do that?
My company is KO Insights, and so it's koinsights.com. And I'm sure you'll put that in the show notes.
Yes, fantastic. We'll direct people there as well, and to the book as well. Those links will be in the description, and you can check those out there. To everybody that's been listening, thank you so much for listening and sharing. It's been amazing. We've been growing very nicely, so it's been really good. And as always, everybody, have a magical week.